I have always been a huge fan of horror films, but horror has become a genre that has been growing stale year after year. The issue with horror films and horror as a genre is that we as an audience are becoming receptive and then adapting to the different ways our mind can get scared. Once we see a particular type of scare, we expect it the next time. It isn't like a romantic flick where the same base plot can work in a million films and still make you cry at the end. Horror needs to be redefined to make an impact each and every time. And innovation isn't as easy when it comes to finding a new way to scare an audience. Ideas are usually always inspired and therefore become predictable. Predictability, though, is a very key aspect of a horror film. What scares the human mind is usually the unknown, the darkness. We don't know what lies within, and usually, whatever it is that we might predict might not actually be right. This is what most horror filmmakers try to achieve, defying the predictable standard. As an audience, we shouldn't know when to keep our guard up and when to let it go. This forces a lot of filmmakers to simply use one technique, which is sure to catch an audience off guard: a jump scare. There is nothing to it. We are simply not supposed to expect it coming, so when it happens, we are caught off guard. There is nothing creative or innovative about a jump scare, nor is there essentially anything horrifying about it. It is just our impulse to be taken aback. I completely dislike jump scares. They are overused, overdone, and lack effort. I am not sent home terrified of what will happen when I open my closet the next day, but simply taken aback when I see that scene again. So, what exactly is a good horror film then? Most of the internet will tell you to go watch The Shining, or Halloween, or even Alien. But I can assure you that if you go watch The Shining right now, you wouldn't be as terrified as the internet claims it to be. That doesn't mean The Shining isn't a scary movie, if not one of the best. It simply means that you have adapted to that kind of horror. In the 1980s, Stanley Kubrick redefined horror with The Shining. At an era where everyone was so used to John Carpenter or Alfred Hitchcock, Stanley Kubrick terrified the audience with a method the audience hadn't seen yet. But for the past 30 years, people have adapted their styles so heavily from Kubrick and others that if you see a pair of twins down a hallway,
Hello, Danny. Come and play with us.
you would simply know what to expect. To redefine a genre isn't easy, but it is what you need to do to create a successful horror film. In the past couple of years, I have had a few horror films that I absolutely loved. Two of my favorites would probably be Get Out and Hereditary. But right now, I would like to break down a more innovative horror film, which thankfully got mainstream attention. It Follows. Now, I don't mean to say It Follows is one of the best horror films of all times. I very honestly don't think it is a great horror story, but the experience is truly horrifying. The writer and director of the film, David Robert Mitchell, said in an interview, "I wrote the script in 2011, but I've had the basic idea for the film in my head for a really long time. The sort of core idea being followed by some sort of monster came from a recurring nightmare I had when I was like 9 or 10. This core idea is so simple yet terrifying, but nothing truly ingenious. A figure following you is the concept of many horror or even slasher films. But how Mitchell uses this concept is what is unique. Let's go back and Google what a jump scare is. A jump scare is a technique often used in horror films and video games, intended to scare the audience by surprising them with an abrupt change in image or event, usually co-occurring with a loud, frightening sound. This is usually seen when the antagonist suddenly appears in front of the screen, out of the blue, co-occurring with a jarring scream or sound. Now, here are all the jump scares in It Follows.
Greg.
Just 3 short instances of jump scares in a 100-minute film. And I wouldn't even call most of these jump scares, as the purpose of the first 2 clips, if not the last, are not to scare the audience, but to simply keep them on high alert for what is to come next. It Follows is a horror film that I would say terrifies us by showing us what happens right in between jump cuts. Or in simpler words, what happens before a jump scare. In same interviews before, David Mitchell says this. In this film, there are some moments of chaos where this thing actually arrives, but most of the movie is about the waiting spaces. Imagine each horror film and scene as a rubber band. The music and score, along with the visuals, are usually used to stretch this rubber band, increasing the tension for the audience until suddenly the rubber band snaps, striking the audience. Jump scares are the snap of that rubber band. We feel the pain and hear the snap at the same time. But imagine someone holding this rubber band in front of you and pulling it apart very slowly. You know it is going to break and it is going to hit you. You know it is going to hurt. But what is more terrifying? Anticipating the pain once it breaks for several seconds, or experiencing it for barely half a second. You can't help but flinch your eyes as you see the break coming closer and closer. It Follows uses this tactic of making you anticipate this huge scare, this jump cut and jarring visual, but never actually giving it to you. There are a lot of things wrong about It Follows, and several plot holes in the script. But it still achieves in terrifying the audience without using jump scares. All we know is that there is a figure that slowly walks towards you at all times, and if it reaches you, you will possibly die. But we are never sure what exactly happens once it does manage to catch up. You just never let it reach you. And the simple setup makes us as an audience glare at every corner of the foreground and background to see if anything is following us or not. And the same reflex that you create when watching the film will surely follow you once you leave the film. The next time you see a random figure slowly walking in your direction, your reflex will be to get scared, knowing very well that it isn't a ghost that is haunting you.
When there's torture, there's pain and wounds, physical agony, and all this distracts the mind from mental suffering so that one is tormented by the wounds until the moment of death. And the most terrible agony may not be in the wounds themselves, but in knowing for certain that within an hour, then within 10 minutes, then within half a minute, and now, at this very instant, your soul will leave your body and you will no longer be a person. And that this is certain. The worst thing is that it is certain.